and the fact that the press, as you have seen, has really welcomed the festival is another encouragement, and the only difficulty, of course, will be to match the quality next time. I would like now to invite you to witness a debate panel discussion that will take place in a minute, which will be moderated by my friend, eminent author, critic, art lover, historian, Dr. Alka Pandey, and whose work over the last decades has fueled a lot of reinterpretation and different vision of ancient art and contemporary in the contemporary context. And this is exactly what we'll also try to do through this dancing festival. Alka will, of course, introduce our panelists. Let me just mention them shortly. Mrs. Shobha Deepak Singh, well known, who has just issued a wonderful book published by our friends of Rolly Books, which you can find just here at the entry of the residence. Don't hesitate to purchase it. It's an absolutely wonderful book. We'll also have the participation of Mr. Sanandan Menon, Dr. Dipti Omsheri Bala, and Mrs. Lila Venkataranam and Mr. Justin McCarthy. They all will contribute with their own vision and expertise and experience to this discussion on contemporary dancing and in connection with in traditions. I would like, before leaving the floor to Alka and the panelists, to thank our partners in this endeavor, Kamani Auditorium, the National School of Drama, the Indira Gandhi National Center for the Arts, the Cree Foundation, the Danceworks Company, as well as the Oberoi Hotels and Indigo Airlines, which have contributed to a high level to our festival. Thank you very much. Please, Alka and the panelists are invited to proceed. And of course, at the end of the discussion, I will invite you for snacks and cocktails in the Mughal Garden in this direction. Thank you.
Namaskar and good evening. I'm delighted to see such a wonderful lot of people on this rather sultry day, but I think the discussions will be so interesting that we will forget the heat, the stillness, and there will be a lot of excitement. I'd like to thank my dear friend Francois Richier for hosting a lovely evening as always. He has, from the time he's come here, made magical evenings in his lovely garden, and we've enjoyed all kinds of seasons here, from winter to the monsoon, watching the Beauty and the Beast, and to a slightly still evening, which we hope will become even more pleasant as we go along. It has been a wonderful festival, the Dance Dialogue, and today is really, in some ways, a closing of this. And what makes me really happy are many things. One, Shobha Deepak Singh, whose book, Dancescapes, was done last year. She's the documenter of the book, and we edited it for her. Justin, my friend, is here, who's also been part of the book. So it's really nice that against the backdrop of Dancescapes, we also have this lovely telling film which showed you the wondrous things which have been happening with dance and the compelling way in which dance is being looked at by the French presence in India. What is interesting today in the days of specialization, where we look at many things as dance, painting, music, but in India, we always go back to the Natya Shastra in many ways, because that itself is the coming together and in many ways part of the post-conceptual way of looking at the arts, where different voices, where scientists are looking at painting, where chemists are looking at sculpture. So here we have a lovely panel where there are people who are looking at dance from their own individual trajectory. Before I introduce the participants, I'd just like to talk a little about what Dance Dialogue did for us here in New Delhi with the second edition. In some ways, it is seated at the edge of a precipice. Sitting on top of the peak of classical dance, it is compelling and confronting dancers and choreographers to take the custodians of the classical by its horns, pulling them out of the rules of the classical and breaking the norms. That's what Dance Dialogue did, and in some ways tried to initiate a new vocabulary in the language of traditional dance practice. The festival is about contemporary dance, so there are various issues which come. We may ask, what is contemporary dance? It is definitely not an easy question, and this is what we are going to debate this evening. What defines contemporary dance is one thing definitely, that it is a radical break from what we in stereotypical terms called the classic. Because contemporary dance is relatively nascent, it is unequivocally up to date and doesn't hesitate to melt art, music, poetry, imagery, fashion, and even a bit of trapeze, as you saw in some of the performances which were captured in a new media technology with lens-based work. In some ways, it is also a reconceptualization of classical forms and contents. Some examples of contemporary dancers who have done this and have come to India are Merce Cunningham, Pina Bausch from Germany, and Maurice Béjart from France. Contemporary dance, in some ways, is a 20th century phenomenon. Free from the rules and regulations of ballet, choreographers sought to invent new forms, as yet nameless, which later came to be grouped under this wide generic name called contemporary dance. Contemporary dance, in some ways, reflects the zeitgeist of our times, cultivates variety, combines several kinds of art, and incorporates various influences. In the globalized world, Dance Dialogue stands as a model of intensified cultural exchange between France and India, where contemporary dance reinvents itself by the mixed influence of two cultures to produce a unique performance. In Hindu mythology, dance was believed to have been conceived by Shiva, and he inspired Bharat Muni to write. In some ways, Brahma also entered the fray, and the Natya Shastra was written, a treatise on performing arts from which a codified practice of dance and drama emerged. So I'm not now going to go into our art historical whole dialogue of Indian aesthetics, but we will just have different people coming from their own practice, talking about what they feel is their journey of dance. Now, we called it, we tried to think of a title which could encompass this whole huge geography of dance. We called it Locating Dance in India Today Between Tradition and Contemporaneity. While we were all sitting inside, there was a little thing happening with the participants. Somebody said, and where was modernity? Where is modernity? So these are all issues which are going to be taken up. I will introduce the speakers as they are seated. There is Leela Venkatraman. For people who are in the world of dance, she does not even need an introduction. She is currently faculty at the IIT Madras, and oh, I'm sorry, I'm reading about you. Do forgive me. Yeah, sorry. Sorry. Leela Venkatraman is a dancer and dance critic for the National Herald from 1980, but right now she is writing widely for a number of publications. She's authored books, a couple of books whose names are Tradition in Transition, Bharatanatyam Step by Step, A Dancing Phenomena, Birju Maharaj, is one of the most well-respected critics for the Hindu, and her next book, which is coming out in a couple of months from now, by Niyogi, it's The New Renaissance. It's something to do with, what is the title? After Renaissance, the last 60 years in Indian dance. We have Justin McCarthy here with us as well. Justin is of American origin, but we now forget that because of the number of Indian languages he speaks. He is a noted Bharatanatyam dancer, instructor and choreographer, teaches Bharatanatyam at the Sri Ram Bharatiya Kala Kendra in Delhi. But along with that, he's also a classical pianist and adept in Carnatic music. Actually, there are huge series of all the people, but if I go on, I'll run out of time, my 45 minutes which I've been given. Then we have Shobha Deepak Singh, who is known for wearing many hats. She is a photographer whose book is here, Dancescapes. She's a choreographer. She's the chairman of the Bharatiya Kala Kendra and has been running with tireless energy the Kamani Auditorium, which hosts some of the most wonderful productions in dance, music and theatre. Then there is the charming Deepti Omchari Bhalla, who's actually teaching music in Delhi University, and she is doing a lot of intense research with her mother. She's unearthed several dying forms of which she has also choreographed and presented in the discipline of Mohini Attam, of which she is one of the foremost performers. Lastly is my friend Sadanand Menon, who is a nationally reputed arts editor, teacher of cultural journalism, widely published photographer, prolific writer, who speaks on various things from politics, ecology, cinema and the arts. He is currently the faculty at IIT Madras and is at the Asian School of Journalism in Chennai. So with much further ado, I think I shall take my place as in the seat here and start the discussion. Shall we start with you, Leela? We'll just go along the line. Since we've given the kind of context to what we are doing today, there was a very interesting remark which I picked up on, and you spoke of what was called integrated education. As a person who's been watching, reading, and writing about dance, I just wanted you to kind of explain what you meant that we are today missing out on what is known as integrated education and what you have been witnessing when you look at dance.
In some ways, I think I'm here under false pretenses because I don't profess to be an expert on what is called contemporary dance, because for me, a lot of classical dance is contemporary, something which a lot of people may not agree with. Now, you referred to the Natya Shastra, and you talked about the way in which different parts of the body have been dealt with and described in the Natya Shastra. Now, if you go through certain parts of the Natya Shastra, I think it's absolutely contemporary. It tells you to isolate each part of the body, and it's discussed how the body can be used. So I don't see what is so old-fashioned about the Natya Shastra and what is so old about classical dances. Yes, they are stylized. They have a certain format within which people perform. But to say that all the classical dances are absolutely old and we cannot think of them as contemporary is something that I do not subscribe to. Because even in the beginning, when modern dance, as it was called, was thought of by somebody like Uday Shankar, he first went to the classical dances. He learned classical dance, and out of that he started making his own body movement. And this was not a person who merely took the exotic Orient to the West, but he did a work in his film, if all of you have seen it, Kalpana, a wonderful dance called the Labor and Machinery, where he created an entirely new movement. He's talking about what mindless industrialization can do to this body, making it a kind of a robot. And a lot of Westerners who've seen it have said, this is something that is postmodern. It's not even modern. Now, I think when you learn a classical dance, if you understand it thoroughly in terms of not only the history, the language that goes through its making, the literature, the surroundings from which it comes, how it really connects with reality and the modern world, and how it has been developing over the ages, then I think you can make it absolutely modern. There is nothing old about it. And this is the kind of education which we do not find today, because a lot of schools merely teach the students how to treat the technique of the dance. The body technique is shown, but nothing else is known to the students. Now, when you do that, you are limiting their understanding. And when I see dance in its entirety, classical dance, then I think it is absolutely contemporary. And I know a lot of, when, for instance, Chandralekha, she used the vocabulary of Bharatanatyam. She didn't go to any other dance form. But through Bharatanatyam, it was a voice of resistance. I mean, she found the connectives in yoga, she found it in Kalaripayattu, and what she created for me was very modern, and at that time something which I did not even understand. But there are a lot of classical dancers who are doing this. Well, Sonal Mansingh does something which is absolutely contemporary, the entire repertoire that she created in Odissi. I've seen Geeta Chandran do some wonderful work with Bharatanatyam. She did one called Revisiting Mythologies. And I thought that was one of the most wonderful things that I had seen. And it made a very contemporary statement about the young girl child being aborted when still a fetus and why this happened in this country. And I thought the entire story and the statement that was being made was entirely contemporary. This kind of work is being done by a lot of people. So what do you exactly mean by contemporary? I think it exists in layers at various levels. It's a question of what you really understand by the word contemporary. A lot of contemporary dance from the West is something that I'm not able to relate with, I can tell you very, very frankly. But a lot of the work which I see today, when you're pushing boundaries, when you're trying to do something new, then I think it is contemporary. I'm sure our friend Sadanand Menon will not agree at all, because for him, we are still completely lost in the old traditional format, and we refuse to get out of it completely. But the very word contemporary, I think, is a relative term. And even though I'm a writer on dance and I've been using words like contemporary, classical, traditional, modern, all these we use with impunity. But then you find that these are relative terms. And there is no fossilized thing which you can call classical. I mean, they don't exist in isolated spheres which don't meet at all. One runs into the other, and this is happening all the time. And in the modern stage, when you are trying to relate with reality today, when you're trying to communicate with a cosmopolitan audience, when you're trying to preserve your cultural identity, I mean both personal and regional, then yes, I think you are pushing the boundaries and you are doing something which is contemporary.
Thank you, Leela. Very, very insightful. Also, I'm glad you used words like contemporary and cosmopolitan towards the end, because it gives me a beautiful bridge to our friend here, Justin, who in many ways epitomizes the cultural identity of what we define today a global cosmopolitan artist. coming, not really a part, because we in India like to say that, from the soil. Now, he was born in a non-Indian soil. But in some ways, because we also believe in a karmic kind of distribution, Justin is more Indian than many of us. Playing the harpsichord, playing the piano, doing Western classical performances. He's also trained for a number of years with Leela Samson and other gurus from South India. I wanted to ask you, what do you feel today about dance in India?
First of all, I'd like to say that I think the idea of just to contradict you a bit, the idea of a global citizen, someone who appreciates many different cultures, is an old idea. So I think the world has always been lucky to have people who cross boundaries. And the other thing about, I don't know how Indian I am, but I'm very grateful and happy to be in this country, which I've been for 34 years, and I've always felt very at home here. So that's just to put that into perspective. Because this is the culmination of a festival where France and India have come together, and particularly in the context of contemporary dance, I thought I would just share a few thoughts that may seem obvious about the origins of modern dance and then contemporary dance. In the West, at least it's well known in music and in the visual arts that when revolutions began in those art forms by the end of the 19th century, that definitely a lot of the influence had come from either the East, Asia in particular, or Africa. Certainly in music, in France, it's well known that Debussy was highly influenced by Asian music and others also, and that started a trend that was part of the beginnings of what we call modern music. And in the visual arts, it's well known that even people like Picasso and many, many others were influenced by non-European forms of art as they were trying to forge a new path within their own traditions. In dance, it's not as well known or as well documented, but the Devadasis, dancing girls from South India and from Odisha, I believe also, traveled to Europe and even to Coney Island in New York as early as the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century. And many of the pioneers of both European and American modern dance looked directly to India for whatever liberating influences they needed. Many of the American pioneers traveled to India actually to search for, it may have been a sort of naive search, but to search for a different form of dance. And so I think it's very interesting and very paradoxical, as things usually are in India, that while here in India, this amazing contemporary refashioning of what could have been various ancient art forms was being done, India's influence in the West was helping people come up with the foundations of the modern dance vocabulary. So that's just a little bit of how I see the history of world dance. And then I wanted to speak about Chandra Lekha, because her work has marked many of us, especially classical dancers who have questions about their own art forms. And hers was, and when I say Chandra Lekha, I mean it was actually the work of three people. Chandra Lekha, the dancer, the choreographer, Sadanand Menon, the writer, the thinker, and Dashrath Patel, the graphics artist. And I think, I'm sure Sadanand will agree that the work would not have come out the way it did had it not been for this unusual triumvirate of three people. And hers to me was quite stunning because, as Leela ji has already remarked, it was modern, it was contemporary, yet it was ancient with a feeling of liberation. She delved into Kalaripayattu from Kerala, she delved into yoga, she used the Bharatanatyam vocabulary. All of this with a sound ideological base. Sadanand, Dashrath and Chandra having very strong political feelings, and the work was highly political. And I, before that, very naively really thought that classical arts, especially Bharatanatyam, was not terribly suitable for political statements. But their work certainly challenged that view. So for me, their work was maybe the high mark of modern or contemporary plus classical work done in the 20th century. So I'd like to, and then as far as contemporary dance goes in India, I think it's a really exciting and very different time now, because there are thousands and thousands, lakhs of young people all over India who want to plug into what is known as, globally recognized as contemporary dance. So I think that's changing the scene a lot. And even because modes of communication have changed, even the way people walk, the way people use their bodies is changing as globalization looms large over the world landscape. So I think it's wonderful that France and India have come together to celebrate the contemporary. And there is a lot of work going on in the contemporary field. In Delhi, because I'm a Delhi resident, I know mostly about Delhi, but there's a wonderful organization called the Gati Dance Forum. And that, to me, is doing the best work I've seen in Delhi as far as contemporary dance goes, because they are open to all winds. They're even open to the classical winds, as well as contemporary from west, east, north, south, up and down. So those are just a few thoughts I thought I'd share on this occasion. Thank you.
Thank you, Justin. And now I'd like to ask my friend Shobha. We've worked on 2 books together, actually. So I know her as a tireless documenter, more than even as a choreographer and a person who has done training in scenography. She's highly, has lots of on-the-work experience. But what I really wanted to ask you, Shobha, was that you've been tireless carrying your camera and watching dancers behind your lens, sometimes much to their dismay of clicking pictures, sometimes people being very happy that you are documenting them. But as a documenter and almost as an archivist, what has been your reading of dance in the last so many years that you've been seeing it? You've learnt it, you've watched it, you've choreographed it, you've done ballet festivals, you've been running the Ramayana so successfully for so many years. So,
well, let me first of all say that photographing for the last 40 years, and then when I was told that I'm going to speak here, I took 4 or 5 dancers and put their images from the beginning till now. And I can tell you there was a huge difference, sometimes for the betterment and sometimes not. Similarly, you all know our Ramayana. Last year, I have introduced subtle changes. For example, Sita wears a sleeveless blouse, and a person who writes for the newspaper said, Sita is wearing a sleeveless blouse. So I said, yes. At that time, she wore no blouse at all. She just tore a cloth and just tied it. And similarly, when 12 years ago, when we did our Krishna theme, not to leave it to only Krishna and Radha, but towards Mahabharata, where you see divine folly being the conqueror of the war. That is as pertinent today. But most importantly, I wish to say that the Kendra has done 2 productions which are totally out of the step of mythology. One is Parikrama, which is the journey of the soul, and to show the soul going through air, water, fire, earth, going into the human woman's womb, becoming a human being, and going back. It was a challenge. And we did another ballet called Masks, which was where a man, a boy and a girl, who don't belong to the same society, who fall in love, but the society conquers because they do not want this to happen. Photography has taught me many things, many. I can immediately now, because of my lacks of negatives and prints that I have, trace trace almost like a pencil line how the dancer is developed or not developed. And I have to say today that's, of course, Chandalika is my favorite. I photographed her video, audio, as if there was no tomorrow. But there are some dancers who are, I think the dancers and choreographers from the south, that's my personal view, are very much better than those who we like to see and are able to see from Delhi. And therefore, in our quest to do something better, we did sponsor 2 shows, Atakalari and Prayog, from the south. And I think that people did appreciate it. That's my hope. And we want to continue doing that. And I want to continue photographing them. And I want to continue photographing what I like and what I believe is going to give me some satisfaction artistically. And I want to photograph, I want to say movement as opposed to fair and lovely photographs. That is my USP of photography. Thank you.
Thank you, Shobha. I'm really happy that every speaker is giving me a thread to knit this garland. Shobha just said that she prefers the artistic excellence of dancers from South India. So we have actually Dr. Deepthi Omchari Bhalla here, who's an institutional person teaching Carnatic music in Delhi University, but is a wonderful Mohiniyattam dancer herself. While we were sitting inside and having this little kind of mini conference, there was a talk about what institutions are doing, how they are kind of stifling almost sometimes talent and the spirit of inventiveness and innovation. And Deepthi gave a spirited defense and talked about how institutions and ideas are about producing a rasika, somebody who's enlightened enough to understand and appreciate performance in a manner or the context in which it should be done. So Deepthi, would you like to share with us some of your own experiences, one as a dancer, and then the double hat that you wear as an institutional person, as an educator?
I'd like to first speak about as a dancer. I really don't know whether, the gradual change from what my teacher taught and the changes that I brought about in the repertoire that I perform today, or in the Nritta and Nritya aspect and Natya which I perform, whether that comes under the contemporary or that is connected to tradition, I really don't know. I can't really say for sure, but it has been a gradual process. And a process which has been coming very unconsciously to me and very naturally to me. That's number one. So in today's time when we speak about the effective and educative choreographies, I've tried to some way I've tried to maybe justify that. Because when I started Mohiniyattam, which is comparatively a very recent revival, after the revival that has taken place, you could say it's a very recent origin. I mean, if you say 1930 onwards, whatever we are seeing is the real Mohiniyattam that we can speak about. So my effort has been more to dwell deep into its past than what is happening in the modern context. I've not been really paying much attention to the modern context because I felt the need to further what are certain things that were perhaps required to better enhance the Mohiniyattam style than to give it a complete different shape and structure and call it some kind of contemporary dance. If you see, when I learned from my teacher, I had a very small repertoire. the hair was tied behind. My teacher was very particular that it should be tied behind the head, and also the fact that the repertoire had the movements which were just moving forward and backward. I could not avail of much of space because she felt that it was very important that every expression of a dancer, every body movement should be very, very subtly portrayed. So if you go and cover a lot of space and do too much of a movement, that gets it gets lost. And also the fact, so these were certain things that I had to strictly follow. But then later on, when I developed myself and grew as a dancer, I realized that there were certain changes which Mohiniyattam required for its inherent quality and beauty, innate beauty. So for that, I realized that having a hairdo at one side of the head was somehow a part of that. And the repertoire, I felt, instead of having a repertoire which was so very similar to another classical dance form, perhaps we could have some repertoire which brought us closer to Kerala and its music and art forms. So these were certain things on which I have really worked on. And on the other side, I realize in today's time, if I just present a pure classical dance performance, there will be very few rasikas and I may perhaps not reach out to a large audience. So for that, I realized I took up certain ideas, certain concepts, one of which I just presented with a friend of mine in the Kalaghoda festival in Bombay. And that was a theme I took up from a very eminent poet, Malayalam poet of Kerala. And we titled it as Fallen Flower. And that poetry was Veena Poowa. That means how the flower blooms from the earth and how it becomes so beautiful, like the youthful beauty of a young maiden, and then how it shrivels and then gets back to the dust. That's the poetry. And it's very intense. So how we just with the light, the sound, and the movements of the body. So she used her Odissi movements, whereas I used the Mohiniyattam movements, but not when we were doing it together. So there were certain places where I brought in my Mohiniyattam structure and certain places she brought in, but most of the time we were trying to evolve the whole concept. And I think that was very well covered by the critics. Similarly, in Delhi, when I presented Geeta Govinda Rashtrapatis based on Hindustani classical music, I had to explore a huge space. So I changed my movements to suit that. Now, some of the Puritans did not like it. They criticized it and they said that you should have internalized it more. Whereas Leelaji was there at that time and she said this is the demand of the space and you have to somehow cover it up. So these are certain challenges that I have tried to face and overcome. Coming to my institution, the idea of starting a faculty of music, I don't know about the others, was mainly to sensitize the students who enrolled to really understand the final nuances, the finest nuances of Indian classical music, which generally a person who has been hearing day and night good music gets tuned to, But that kind of a thing is not available. Earlier it was in the All India Radio, you had full day classical music programs, devotional songs coming in, and it was easy for a person to get tune his ear and the concerts, get tuned to his ears to the nuances and the subtleties, which brought about like that kind of an expression. So how to train them to understand the importance of Shruti, the importance of blending your voice to that perfect note which creates that aesthetic experience and ananda in the audience. So these are the things that we've tried to imbibe, teach and help them imbibe in an institution. Not making them a performer par excellence. And also considering in the present times, we are also introducing many things for the students who can't take it up as a profession, but who want to go into other avenues like recording studios. For that, they need to be competent in music and not just as teachers and professors. So we have evolved a lot of avenues for the students to choose. So
you're actually opening a huge new discussion,
yes.
And I think we'll need another session to actually, these are very vital issues, and
because from here we help them to take off and find a guru and then evolve themselves as musicians.
Very, very significant. But I want to also be ruthless and stick to the time constraint, for which I've been told many times. So I'll stick to being a timekeeper. And I come now to my friend Sadanand, and we kind of wrap up also the discussion. But I'd like him to speak from his, his own trajectory, where he is wearing many, many hats, which have been talked about by his colleagues here. So we leave you to.
Thank you, Alka, and I think I'm very grateful to my co-panelists for literally having woven, as Alka said, a garland of ideas and thoughts which kind of interconnect, but in a pretty broad kind of canvas. However, one would like to flag the possibility of naivety creeping into a discourse like this. When we use categories like tradition and modernity in a naturalistic sort of way, as if there was once upon a time tradition, then the tradition grew, became modern, then modern grew, became postmodern, grew, became contemporary. The whole, counting of history as if it's beads in a rosary and it's got a linear thread, that's a problematic issue. I think we need to be able to, in fact, engage with it. And that's probably one of the limitations of, I think, Indian dance discourse particularly. This danger has not come into, for example, film studies or music studies or theatre studies or visual art studies. But in dance, this is a problem. The problem of not being able to engage with its own history. And the question of how do you reclaim your past in order to deliver it to the future, which most other disciplines have worked out in an interesting way, but we somehow shy away from it. Primarily, I think for the reason that in dance, and certainly in the Indian context, both the idea of tradition and the idea of modernity are constructs. They're not givens, they're not historic givens, they're constructs. They've been constructed in a particular way. And if we call what happened circa year 1929, when E. Krishna Iyer recreated Sadiratam and Dasiyatam and called it Bharatanatyam, and soon a few years later Rukmini Devi Arundel picked it up and sort of institutionalized it in a sense. If we call that tradition, I think we are living in some kind of a historic blind alley, because this is a modern moment. I mean, precisely what Justin also tried to say, that this is an influence of a certain kind of global exchange that is happening, and a modernity is being constructed there. And our inability to accept that this was a modern movement, I think, has pushed Indian dance discourse quite into a backward pedaling mode. Because we have lost time. We have lost about 60, 70, 80 years now of not being able to honestly engage with our own history. And for that, one needed the kind of work, for example, that Shobha did, sitting with a camera day after day and recording and documenting and creating an archive. That, for example, is a beginning of modernity, creating of an archive where you can actually look at the passage of time, look at the way bodies have changed, look at what was past, what is present, look at the idea of movement of time in the body. And to give an interesting example, there is not much material, in fact no material, no documentary footage available in India of what, let us say, the Indian so-called classical dance, Devadasi dance, for example, was in the 1920s. We don't have a footage. We have footage from the film that Leela Venkatraman talked about, Kalpana, Uday Shankar's film. There's some footage, but that's of the 1940s. We don't know what this dance was, Devadasi dance was, which was so reviled. They were called prostitutes, they were called chi-chi dancers, and so on and so forth. They were despised as Nach girls. Now, what was so bad about it? What was wrong in it? And what happened in the reconstruction of the dance, reconstruction of the body, as it were, in the year 2930, with the arrival of the urban bourgeoisie, Brahminized upper caste, into the arena. To find an answer to that, you have to travel all the way to America, to go to the Jacob's Pillow archive. Jacob's Pillow was a wonderful dance institution created by Ted Shawn and Ruth St. Dennis, where you actually have footage of what the Dasis were doing in the 1920s, let us say. And what were they doing is fascinating. You will find that the reconstructed Bharatanatyam is an upper torso dance. The dancer virtually behaves as if there is no bottom. As my great German dancer friend Susanna Linke used to say, where is your popo? Show us your popo. Popo is not worked out in that form, because there is a certain kind of a attitude about showing posterior. This part of the body is all taboo. This part is better. Face is the best, and so on and so forth. So it's an upper torso dance. You see the footage of the Devadasi dances, and you are stunned by the extraordinary mobility of below the torso. So it's like a kind of a, how does one say, it's equivalent of a lobotomy. It's equivalent of a surgery, plastic surgery, where a body has been cut and pasted, and suddenly, from the year 1930s onwards, you see only upper body working and lower body doesn't work. So now, these are issues which I think dancers, dance teachers, dance historians, and all the fraternity of dance, all the stakeholders in dance, have to collectively engage with, because this is where the crux of the issue lies. How does one excavate from the material that is available and create a healthy, vibrant present and a future? So the reason then why contemporary dance assumes a certain importance today is because it seems to be accommodative of far more identities. I mean, after all, what is the dancer's material? You deal with emotional material like desire, longing, anguish, pain, agony, love, sorrow, reconciliation, waiting, and so on and so forth. And the correlates of that in the body, which would be balance and stretching of time, stretching of body, slowness, control, breath, etc., etc. This is a common material for anybody who works with the body, whether it's a tribal dancer in a Gond village, or whether it's a modern dancer on the American stage, or whether it's a contemporary dancer on the Indian stage, whether it's a classical dancer from many parts of the world. This is common material. But the question is, what is one then doing with the body? In the classical forms, in the so-called traditional forms, the approach to the body is an idealization. There's an idealization of the body, which is a particular aesthetic that it inherited. It's an aesthetic of the bourgeoisie, which finds a particular kind of beauty in harmony, balance, symmetry, and so on. And this is what modernity cuts into. When Martha Graham came out of Ruth St. Dennis's company, the Ted Shawn company, Dennis Shawn company, saying, I no longer want to be an Indian dancer. That was a protest, because the Dennis Shawn company was taking material from the Orient, from India, and so on, and presenting that as the kind of idealized kind of body activity. She began to show rupture. She began to show post-World War complexes in the body, people who are alienated from the body, twitches in the body, and so on and so forth. So this possibility of therefore showing the body not just as idealized but also as brutalized. In our times, the body is also brutalized. And I think in the contemporary movement, I'm just cutting it very short and quickly making a last point, in the contemporary movement, the quest of the younger dancers who don't necessarily come from specific schools, who don't necessarily acknowledge gurus, who don't necessarily acknowledge particular gharanas and so on, but take from anywhere they want, take from any kind of mixed bag, bean bag as it were, they want. The kind of stuff that one sees in the program that Sonal Mansingh is anchoring on Doordarshan today. Rumjhum, where you see all sorts of body movements which are possible. This is a quest towards not idealization, not brutalization, but a different path called humanizing the body. And I think in today's times, that is what the artists are searching for. How does one humanize our work? How does one bring moisture, old word, Natyashastra word, rasa into the work? And that's, I think, the ultimate quest.
Hello, yeah. Thank you very much. And I think, like a Ragamalika or the entire circle of the Navarasas, we have come from the Natyashastra to Jacob's Pillow, and we've talked of a range of things, but ultimately it is the triumph of the universal spirit of Ananda, of joy, and of, you know, this whole thing of sublimity, which is part of dance, that I think we've discussed through various kind of trajectories this evening. We do have a little bit of time where we'd like some kind of a exchange with the audience and the wonderful speakers that we've had. So we're open to just about 3 questions, if I may be allowed to just stop after that.
I would like some of the people here to respond to what I have to say. And that is about a lot of young dancers who are learning contemporary dance from choreographers who come from the West. Now, when I look at the work of Chandralekha, it is Indian, you know, and I think there is a cultural identity. This body has a cultural identity. And it has a cultural memory also. And when youngsters work with a lot of these foreign choreographers, they copy a lot of their movements and they just imitate them on the stage. And somewhere I think there is a misfit. I mean, what they are and what they are doing don't seem to come together. I was talking to Susanna Linke about this some time back. She had come to one of the organizations to give Gati. She was with Gati doing a workshop. And in a general conversation, she said, you know, I don't like the idea of these people learning Western dance movements. I think it is all wrong because their body is not meant for that. They have grown up in a different way. The cultural memory is different. So what I do is when I come for these workshops, I work with these youngsters and I say, now what is your base? Have you learned Odissi? Have you learned Bharatanatyam? Have you learned Kathak? What is the base of movement base that you have? Now with what you have, can we work and try and find out if new movements can evolve? How do you extend this, go beyond this? Don't get locked into a kind of system that the body cannot go beyond. Because then you can't cross certain traditional lines. You are just there and you can't go beyond that. Now, how do you go beyond this and create something which is more broad-based? I want to open up their bodies and show them to work with the styles they already have. Because that is their identity. I don't want to teach them German dance, because they're not going to be Indian German dancers. Now, this is something I would like people to comment on, because sometimes I see these people who do some Indian movement and then they sort of jump from here to there and they think they're doing ballet. And somewhere I feel that the dancer is not in the dance, it's just movement, and there's a lot of physicality, but the cultural identity gets lost somewhere. Now, you may be contemporary, but you have to be contemporary Indian. And I think that is where you really take the message across.
Thank you so much, Leelaji Sadananji. But there's just one issue which I wanted to just ask you. The definition of contemporary, and that is what, because in our context it's parampara. So there is no, the whole idea is redefining what we have to adapt to the changing times, flowing idea of tradition. So And so that is, so do we contextualize our contemporariness according to what Leelaji says, to the Western idea of what we find contemporary? Or do we look at, say, people like Pandit Birju Maharaj Ji, who created, and as Sadananji says about that 1929-1930, the watershed in the Indian dance, and we are honest enough to redefine and reclaim what we call the Indian identity, and therefore we are not really misfits in that redefinition of contemporary. So how much is it that, and those are the borders we need to debate.
Thanks. The light is in my eye. I can't see. What's your name?
Nabina Jaff.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, thanks for the question. I mean, there are many ways one can, many routes and many paths one can take to talk about this and try to find definitions. The good thing about contemporary is there are still no definitions. And because, for example, if you use that word parampara, then parampara does not equal tradition. Tradition is an extremely colonial word. It was invented in the year 1882 precisely, and it's been used since then in a colonial context, and we have adopted it. We have not questioned it. We have not counter-questioned it. We have not, excavated or de-excavated that word from its colonial meaning and made it our own. So it remains, therefore, a problematic word. And for me, therefore, the straight definition for what one would like to call contemporary work is a work that shows us an element of risk. The classical work, the so-called traditional work, has an element of comfort in it. You are dancing center stage. You're not dancing, once again, as Susanna Linke said, very demonstratively. When I dance here, oh, I'm perfectly good, I'm very good. When I dance here, I'm perfectly good, very good. But when I come here, then risky. That edge of the stage riskiness is what the contemporary dancer undertakes, because there are no reference points. And you know that you're facing people who will be very harsh on you. If I come from a Pandit Birju Maharaj lineage, if I come from a Kalyani Kuti Amma lineage, I'm perfectly safe. I know somebody is holding my hand center stage. But when you do that, there is a risk factor, and the risk factor is what eventually pushes the content, the sort of politics of the work. And that is what I think today's audiences are beginning to expect. I think they're getting a bit uncomfortable with the comfortableness and the bourgeois status of the center stage dancer. And I think that's where the space is opening out. So that's very interesting. One doesn't know what will emerge, but the definition will keep changing as it goes on, I think.
Also, I want to just carry on from where Sadanand has left off, that when I was very young, I think it was 1952, Shamu Maharaj, it was the National Dance Festival by the Sangeet Natak Academy. I was only accompanying my mother, but I did see Shamu Maharaj doing Kaun Gali Gayo Shab, and Bala Saraswati was so inspired that she got up and they both had a kind of a one was outdoing the other till 3 hours in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning. I wish somewhere that could have been documented.
I think the rest, maybe we could, there is.
I just wanted to react to what Leelaji said about how the Indian dancer who's trying to be a German dancer is a misfit. To me, that's a Brahmanization of our dances. To say that we know, hence we are right. Because what I say, hear you not. What I say, hear you not. If I have the intention to communicate and don't know the language, it does not mean that I'm not sincere in my communication. Here's a foreigner. When he does Bharatnatyam, I know the time that Justin was bleeding with his ghungroos digging into his leg, and nobody forgets that. Because the foreigner made this his vocabulary. So if someone is doing their German jumps in the middle of something purely classical, perhaps that is their vocabulary, that is their heritage. So that's what I'm saying. Like we've got to go and do what you can. Take in the world and show it from your eyes, as long as those eyes are honest.
No, I entirely agree with you. If it is something which has become a part of you and you made your language, wonderful. For instance, you look at Akram Khan doing something in Gnosis, you see him, for instance, modern dance. I mean, here is a Kathak dancer who learned modern dance, and he puts the two together in the most wonderful fashion. And the person who's with him is a Korean dancer, and she uses the Tai Chi technique. And she also uses modern dance because she's been in the West for a long time. Now, if it has really become a part of you and you are expressing yourself, that's fine. But what I'm saying is outwardly, you just learn something from somebody and you show it on the stage, then it's not you. It's something else that you are trying to imitate. That's what I'm saying. A lot of young people do this.
The last question, if there is. So, thank you very much, and shall I carry your orders, Francoise, and go for a drink the other side? Thank you very much.